All right. Thank you, Michelle. Get that. I got it. All right. So this hopefully will turn out to be a good presentation. Like I mentioned earlier, this is the first real official presentation on it. So, or that I've done. I did a practice run with some people, and this is the improved version. So if you have questions, if you seem to get lost as we're going, please stop me during the presentation, bring them up, and we'll improve it. Okay. So our agenda is we're going to look through and review what the Power BI connection types are. And then I'm going to jump right into my very first demo, because once we kind of look at the connection types and we do a first demo, that seemed to help people kind of get an understanding of what the composite model really is and what it's doing. We'll talk about how you have to enable the preview feature. This is still in preview right now. We'll go into some additional demos, and we'll talk about different restrictions, different things to think about during that time. I'll give some useful links, and then we could have questions, additional questions or discussion at the end. Is this slide big enough for everybody? Do y'all want it bigger?
Nope, looks good.
Okay, I made it just a little bigger anyways. Okay, so, I see I forgot to put a definition down at the bottom here. The different Power BI connection types, just to kind of as a refresher. I think everybody has a pretty good understanding of these, but I don't know, maybe somebody doesn't, right? So import model, that's what we're all used to seeing, and we work with probably most of the time, right? That's where you define connections to your data source, bring it into the model, it compresses it, as you produce your schema, and it's always the fastest. So like I said, the most common, and you're probably very familiar with that. DirectQuery, right? So DirectQuery is where you define out a model, and within that model, the data isn't brought into the data set, but yet queries are generated and sent back to the originating source. So for example, a SQL Server database is a very common use for that. And as you define your model, it will actually generate SQL statements and send them back to the SQL Server. And you can see that all happening. So it's that system that is processing this. So DirectQuery, there are only, I don't know how many different data sources. There's a bunch, but not every data source supports DirectQuery. And for the longest time, the data source of a Power BI data set or an analysis services tabular model hosted on Azure, those could only be done by what's at the bottom here called live connection. And as I said, I apologize for missing, got to finish my slide deck and put a definition there. But the live connection is when you're doing a thin report. And so you just say, connect to a Power BI data set, and it shows as a live connection. And we'll see that here in just a second. And then it's this mixed model that is pretty much called the composite data model. So this can combine different modes, so different connection types. The import and the DirectQuery is the most common. And when that happens, it becomes this composite. And on your Power BI desktop, it'll show it as mixed. We're using the word a whole lot for this feature called DirectQuery to Power BI datasets and Azure Analysis Services, because that's the full name of the feature. You're hearing it called composite models a whole lot because that's the simpler way to just state it. So one of the things that I'm going to kind of use on that is call it a composite model just anytime I move off of live connection and connect to the Power BI data set.
Evan?
Yeah.
Belinda, so for any of you who are wondering how long it would take me to ask the first question, go ahead and look at the time. So I just wanted to be clear, when you're doing a thin report, you're referring to that as a direct query?
No, when you're doing a thin report, that's a live connection.
A live connection. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's our typical connection path for a thin report, is going to be a live connection. And I'm going to jump right into the first demo and show that. Right. So what we're going to look at is extending a data set to perform a custom top-end filtering using a what-if parameter and a measure. So let me go ahead and bring over my Power BI desktop. And I'm going to move this out of the frame. You all see Power BI now, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So if we wanted to produce a report from a data set, we come up here and we say Power BI data sets. And then it brings us a list of data sets that we have access to. So I'm going to pick this customer profitability in our example data and say create. And what you see at the bottom here, oh, I forgot I closed out Zoom It. Let me open Zoom It up, because when I rebooted, it closed it down. But what you see, if you see the bottom of my screen that I'll make bigger here in just a second, it says connect it live to the Power BI data set, and it tells you which one it is and what workspace it's in. We have this part right here of being able to make changes to this, and that's when we convert it into a direct query to the data set. But this is typically what you have when you have a thin report, right? We call it a thin report because right now in this report, there's no model associated with it. So if we saved it and we looked at the size of the PBIX file, it would be very small compared to the full data set, right? Because the data isn't in there. And we could come on here and we could produce, any type of visual with it. We'll pick our total revenue.
Kevin, can I just ask you, this is on a real quick question. In the lower right where it said make changes to this model, is that, I just don't remember seeing that.
Yeah, I'll show that. I'll show you how we get there in just a little bit. Okay, but that's the part that changes it to doing the direct query.
Okay, cool.
And I'm gonna do that here after. I'm just gonna pick something, right, and say customers. And I'll put I think this gets big, but if we put our customer names into this, right, we could produce this. One thing you can do within reports is you could write your own measures, and then they are report level measures. I'm not going to go ahead and do that, but that is something that I could do, right? If I come up here and I say I want to produce a new measure, I said I wasn't going to do it, but right, it gives me this ability, right? It lets me go through those steps. Okay, so now if we remember what I said the exercise was, is we want to produce a top N measure to filter down, and I'm going to actually convert this to a matrix or a table. Let's convert it. Let's convert it to a table. Right, so right now we get all of these customers on here. There's a technique you could use, what if parameters, to allow your end user to interact with your report, to say, I only want to see the top so many of this. So the first thing you have to do is come into modeling and add a new what if parameter. But if you see, when we're using this live connection, this connect it live, we're not allowed to do that. So we could enable that by clicking on this make changes to this model. So we go ahead and do that. And the first statement that comes up to this is, to make changes, you need a direct query connection. This is that new feature the DirectQuery to Power BI datasets, and Azure Analysis Services, or shorthand composite models. So we're going to tell it, go ahead, add the local model. And it goes through and does a little bit of work. And now you see that it changed. I can't get it as big as I want it. Let's go right there, right? So it changed our storage mode to DirectQuery. So that's what that does for us. So now notice we stayed on this modeling screen and our parameter is now enabled. So we could click on here and we're going to create a parameter called top n with a whole number, and we're going to give it a minimum of 0, and let's just cap it at 10. And the default will make it 5. Be an increment to 1, and we're going to tell it to go ahead and add the slicer to this page. So hopefully y'all have seen this. This isn't much new, right? But you could see now we have a top n parameter. And if you look, we have a new table that was just added to our model, right? This table here, top n, wasn't there before. So that's what happens when you use a parameter. Also notice our storage mode changed to mixed. So now we have a true composite model, right? We're in that mixed storage mode that we were talking about. And what you'll notice is that all of a sudden we have this data tab showed up that wasn't really there before. We can't see the data of any of our remote models, but we can see the data from this table that happens to be in our model. And we could tell it's in our model because you see the storage mode there shows that it's import, where the storage mode on this one is, on all of these others, is DirectQuery. So now what I could do is, again, I could write a measure just like I could before. And I'm going to say new measure. And I'm going to call it top n customers. And I'm going to cheat and cut and paste this. And I'll walk through what the DAX does. Okay, so what this does is this gets the selected value of our top n column, table and column, and then it returns as if the selected value is 0, it just returns total revenue. Otherwise, it does the rank function for all of the customer names that are within scope and finds the total revenue. And it's gonna rank it by the total revenue, or yeah. It's going to rank it by our total revenue, and that the total revenue is below, this format's a little bit funny, the selected value, okay? So let's go ahead and tell it to save that, move off of it. So now if I duplicate this visual, and what I'm going to do is change out and take this off and put our new measure top n customers on it. And then if we set it to 3, you'll see it just simply filters down to the top 3, right? So this again, this is not, this is some, common functionality. But what I wanted to show is we hit a limitation doing our thin report where we couldn't do something that was being asked of us. Moving this into our composite model, our mixed mode, now allowed us to get around that limitation. And what we're seeing, Donald kind of mentioned it before we started all the recording, is we see a lot of articles, and I'll have links to them, that are talking about the use of composite models, but it's looking at it as a way to build and connect models together, where I'm trying to show there's other methods to use this composite model feature that I think will help you write better extended thin reports. I haven't really come up with a good name with it yet. But that's what I'm trying to get across here, and that to show, how we get to a composite model. Okay. So hopefully that kind of sets our framework and our level set of where we, what a composite model is. Now, kind of back to what Amin was talking about earlier. Boy, this came out really kind of ugly. I should walk through all my slides ahead of time, I guess. I just started doing this all before Christmas, so I apologize. So what we want on this is where, and you were asking about getting that, make changes to this model. Because this is a preview feature, you need to come into your Power BI desktop and go into the preview features setting and make sure this box is checked. And if I go back to my desktop, right, so you come to File, Options and Settings, Options, and it's up at the top, Preview Features. It's this checkbox here. When you change that checkbox, it's one of those actions that you have to close and reopen Power BI Desktop. So the next time that you open it, it will enable it. But that's how you get that setup, that change that we showed earlier down here. Okay, so what else could you kind of do with this? Well, I already showed you what if parameters. I'm going to walk through an example of being able to produce your own perspectives to personalize your visuals. And hopefully you remember that feature as well. We'll walk through that a little bit more. There's also a way that you could reduce the visible tables to your user. And then you could reuse this model that you've produced and extend it. You could reuse this in Excel. And now I just remembered one thing I forgot to set up ahead of time. And then the last one, Donald, this is what I'm crediting you with, is you gave this idea to me, is you can bring multiple models into a data set and you don't have to connect them. You could bring them in to do different things. And I'm going to show an example of producing a report where I had two different subject areas in the same report file, didn't connect the models, but page one showed something from one set of data, page two shows something from another set of data. I also see this as a way that if you're changing things and you have a test and a production version, you could produce your own composite model and run similar queries against both to make sure that you didn't change things that you didn't expect to change. And we'll walk through that just a little bit more. All right, so I'm going to save this. That's not where I want it to be, so let me move off of that. Let's see. While I'm figuring out my right save area, any questions to this point? Anything that I could help clarify? All right.
I'll just add, I love seeing these non-data or these use cases of composite models that don't necessarily add data to the model, that add functionality to the model. I think that's very cool.
And that's a good way to say it, Belinda, right? You're adding more functionality while still using a common, or maybe even your enterprise model in the background. Yeah, that's a really good way of stating it. All right, so let's come over and let's talk about personalized visuals, right? So I'm going to go ahead and put back a bar chart, and we'll just do it by customers again, since I have customers open here. And we'll do it by total revenue. I guess I did it by customer country. That's fine. So when you come into your file, you could tell it, you could turn on your options and settings within the current file, your report settings, and turn on personalized visuals, right? So this allows the user to change things on their visual once you publish it out to the service. If we publish this to the service right now, which let me go ahead and do that first, because I had rebooted and I didn't set everything up like I wanted to. I need to log myself in. Sorry about this.
That's okay. I was just curious how many people out there are using personalized visuals, so personalizations on visuals. Is anybody else using them?
I've turned them on for a few models. I don't know if anyone's using them. The biggest case I had, somebody had a table where they just had a huge number of rows, and they were creating different reports for different people. I said, look, just customize it and include the columns you want to see and save it as a personalized visual. And then you don't, or, just save your own bookmark and you don't have to have a bunch of different copies. But,
yeah. And so many people that say they want to write reports, they don't want to learn how to build their own reports. They just want to create their own visuals. And it's a great way to let them create their own visuals by setting it up.
So we use it for people who don't want to analyze in Excel, but they still want to export a table. But so we always have a details, not always. Some reports, some customers have a details table at the end of the report, and I allow them to personalize that one so that they can add whatever columns they want for their export. Does that make sense?
Can you control that they can only personalize that last one, or does it apply to everything in the report?
You can turn off the personalization from the tooltips menu, or not tooltips, the header in the visualizations.
Okay.
If we come over here,
Yeah. I forgot where it is now.
the header icons.
I wasn't looking at who was talking, and Dan, I was thinking his voice sounds really familiar.
So you could turn it off per visual here once you enable it for the report.
That's great.
Okay.
I love that idea, Dan. Sorry, Kevin. I love that idea of allowing people to add columns to the report. I mean, that's I mean, I know technically it's the same thing, but it's not something I would typically think about. So I like that idea.
Yeah. So if you see, trying to get back to where we are, right? So here, when I want to be able to personalize this visual, I could come in here and I got every field available to me. But what if that's not what you want, right? So right? There is a way to set what's called a perspective in order to limit this down. And we're just going to go ahead and do that now. And that of course takes an external tool. So you could do this in Tabular Editor 2 as well, but I happen to utilize Tabular Editor 3, and I like that a little bit better. So I'm going to get that started.
I was going to mention, this is what we do, is add perspectives. To answer your question, Belinda, he's going right down the path that you asked.
Yep.
Or I don't know if you asked it or somebody else asked it. How do you control what they can see?
Right. But in your setup right now, you'd have to add all of those perspectives to
Yep.
like the main model. Now here, this way, you could have the report user add their own perspective that's just for that report, right?
I like this.
And so so I'm going to go ahead and create and just say personal. And I am going to cheat. I have a perspective editor tool in this tool because this is just a whole lot easier. Modify existing, personal, go. And so out of customers, the only thing that I want them to add, say, is city and postal. The facts, if I want to be able to have them change the fact, I'll let them change out to gross margin and revenue budget. And I'm going to tell it to modify. This doesn't give me a message, but I'm pretty sure it did it. And I'm going to save these changes back to the model, close this. Now, this is one strange thing that has happened to me. I might have to close and restart Power BI. But the way you configure this now is you come over to you select the page and go into your format, your report page, personalized visual. And yeah, it still just shows default. See if I come here and just do refresh, if that helps me. No. So for some reason, I need to close and reopen this.
So as you do that, Kevin, the key is here, it's on the page level, not the visual level. I don't know how many times I've gone in here and then like, where's my menu option? Where's my option to change it? It's because I have a visual selected and you won't see it in the, well, it used to be the paintbrush, but in the formatting options, unless you have the page itself selected.
Yeah, and then that does apply to the entire report, right?
To that page.
Oh, okay. I thought it went through the entire report, but that makes sense. Yeah, it's for the entire page. So now you can see the one I added called personal is there. Oh, okay. You could also click to tell it to apply to all pages. If you don't, I guess it's going to apply just to that page. So we're going to save. And now we'll publish this again. Do my demo for today. Always a fun little ways of having delays in here. Got it. Come back here, do a refresh on our report. We'll refresh the entire browser just to make sure. Now, when I come in, if I go to personalize and I want to say add, notice the only things I get is the items that I, the columns that I selected. And I guess I should have put total revenue on here since that had it in the beginning, right? Because you can't get back to what you have if you've changed it. Right, but this is how I could change it now and limit it down to just what we want it to be. So I could change this to budget, and you could see it changes. But again, as was kind of mentioned with that discussion with Dan, the way that you had to do this before is if you needed something smaller for a particular report, you had to build it into the back end model. And if you're trying to use enterprise models, you kind of then clutter up your model with all these additional objects, these perspectives or whatever, just for all these different report functionalities. Again, some of the custom tables, smaller tables and things like that, you could do that as well. But definitely follow the SQL BI guys. They're going to be talking a whole lot about performance. They just put a new video out today about calculation groups and how you could hit snags and get wrong results and everything. So again, if you're going to use this type of feature, start small with just trying to, what does somebody put? Feature richer than reports. Dan, I like that one as well.
And just a reminder for the perspectives, you could use it with the free open source version of the tabular editor. Yeah.
Yes.
Version 2.
Yeah, the version 2. Yeah, I just happen to be able to move through this one because I use this. It's up all the time. Okay, so the next one that I wanted to talk about of an idea is one thing you can do is reduce the visible tables in the model itself. So, excuse me. So we could do that by once we've added a DirectQuery to a Power BI data set, we could come into the settings, click on this, tell it change source, and then we're going to select that one again. And what you see is start out with all of the tables selected. But if I wanted to reduce these down, that the only tables visible inside this model is I could just uncheck them. Now, what you can't do is you can't go down to the column level. You're going to bring in every column from that table. But now if I do this, oh, there was another thing. Let's do the change source again. You could also say that you do or do not want to include tables that get added later. I'm going to tell it not to. We're not going to add any tables, but just to show that you can. And we close. So you see over here, we have a lot less tables. We still have our top end table, right? Because that's import inside our model, but we don't have all the tables from that DirectQuery setup. So this is a good way to produce, perspectives could help you reduce objects and tables that people could see, just like we saw in visualization. But the other thing is, if you want to do this for Excel people, they're not going to be able, well, they can try to connect to the perspective. It's harder to do with Power BI data sets. And I think you have to have the XML endpoint to actually specify what perspective. But if you want to give people just, all you need are these 4 tables, this is a way to do that. So I'm going to save this as a different, oh, I didn't save it as a different one. I'm going to save as reduce, just because I want to publish it with a different name. Okay, so now I could publish this to the service, right? Go ahead if you had a question on it.
So you're saying it's just expressly to reduce what's visible, right? So you've reduced to hugely what's visible. And so is that because you cannot hide them in the model view because of the mode? Because you can also, like in a regular or like an older, you could go into the model view, you could say, don't show this in the report. And I thought that would sort of hide things.
And that's a great point. Yes, and that does. But then you could also come out and say, view hidden, right?
Oh, okay.
You could say, now I'm saying view hidden, nothing else is showing up.
Okay, gotcha.
Right, so they're never going to see them there. But the other thing is you may not hide everything in your enterprise models, because if you're going, especially as we're trying to get up to talking about using this in Excel, anything that you hide in your enterprise models or your models you're trying to reuse over and over again, you can't unhide it in Excel. So you may want to produce, different models with scaled down things for what we're working on getting to here, is showing it done within Excel. Okay, so let's go back to our workspace. We'll see we have multiple models now, right? And this is where I want to start showing. I'm going to go ahead and connect to Office. This is where I start getting errors if I don't. Hopefully this will work for us. I'm going to go to Excel and say create new workbook. Sometimes it works. Hey, it works for us today. I'm going to say insert. I'm going to say pivot table from Power BI dataset. And you see reduced is one of them. And again, only our tables that were in that reduced model are the ones that's going to be shown here. If I did 1, 2, back to the model we had before, that doesn't have reduced, right? You'll see we get all of those tables. So I think this is a good way as you're getting more and more users to use Excel to help filter out complexities within a model, right? I know I have some models that have 50 plus. I've heard other ones with 70 to 100 plus tables in there, but some of them are kind of specialty tables and they're not always used. And a lot of our users get overwhelmed by it. So this is one place that we've been looking at, trying to use it to filter it down more in order to hide things better.
So Kevin, question.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know the exact answer to this, but I think I have an assumption. This is not a security technique. This is more obscure. What's the phrase?
Obfuscation.
Yeah. Yes.
This is still a version of hiding it. It's not disconnecting a specific user from ever seeing that, because there are ways to see the XML endpoint of that original file, the original report, which then you could hit and see the other tables.
Yeah, right. Because if you think about it, right, in order for, and that's an excellent point, in order for a user to be able to utilize your model that is doing direct query, they also have to have access to the model that you're connecting to. Right. And I could just come in then because I would have read access to this. This is the customer's model itself.
In fact, right now you have to have build permissions on any of the data sets that you are using in your composite models. You have to give build access to those consumers in order for them to read it. And so even though they can't see it in the version you're sharing with them, they have build access to the underlying data sets so they can go out and see those other tables.
That's exactly right, Dan. Yeah. And so that means they could build their own composite models. We know that that's something that what I heard was that's the reason it's still in preview. They're trying to work through that before they make it GA.
Yes, but right now this is great. It helps reduce complexity and make things simpler for most users, but it is not security.
Yep. Good point. So with all that as well, what I wanted to point out is if we go back, I think it's in sheet 2. Yeah, it's going to be either one of these. It doesn't matter. The other thing that's available to us is if you notice the measure that we wrote, top end customers, is available to us in this data set. Now, if we just use the thin report, right, and we publish that out, there's no data model with it. So that measure, if we write any measures in that, that's not available to us in Excel. But here it's going to be available to us. Let me put that and then put customers on it. I wonder what's going to happen here. Oh, okay, I know what I'd have to do. This is new for me. I haven't done this before. But let's put this as a filter. Should be able to say 3. Huh, it didn't work. I'll have to investigate how to get this to work in Excel, because I would have thought that would have.
I'm thinking because it's running the DAX for like ranking and things. DAX doesn't work. This is, you know, me with my statements that are really questions. DAX doesn't work in Excel proper. It works within the Power Pivot in Excel, right?
Yeah,
So a
because this
function like
actually
top,
produces MDX code. So
yeah,
it may not be
so,
sending it the same way.
yeah.
Yep.
Kevin,
But if
what's inside the top N fact table? The top N under your facts? Why did it generate that?
Because there's a measure when you put a parameter in, it produces a measure called top N.
Okay.
And so this is the measure. The way Excel shows things is it shows fact tables wherever the measures are. And it'll even break it out even if you put it on to any other table. That's why top N shows up twice.
So top N value is a hidden measure inside the top N table.
Well, it's not hidden when you do the modeling and say new parameter.
Yeah.
It automatically generates a measure for the
there it
top
is.
N value.
Yeah, it's inside that table. Okay.
Yeah. And it's just Excel shows it differently. But this is one I might have to mess with to see if I could get this working. Like what I think is if we went back and we changed this to instead say our selected value, and we give it a default of 5 as our alternate result. And we save and publish this. This is now in our reduced. So I'm going to have to come back to, is this our reduced one? Yeah, this is in our reduced. Replace. Come to data. That's not working either. All right, sorry, it's something I'll have to mess with.
Yeah, I think the one that you just changed, it was top-end customer for the code in Power BI. Yes, but the code in Excel is really just the top end that created from the new parameter.
Did you refresh the data set in Excel?
He did, but you
Yeah.
were filtering.
Oh, okay, I
Kevin, you
wasn't-
were filtering on the dimension, not the measure. In your
Yeah,
Power
which I
Pivot.
needed to because I get it from the dimension. So
Yeah, but-
sorry, guys, this was just something I was trying to ad hoc, but I mean, we could actually, I'm almost kind of done. I did have one more thing I want to show. If we're really interested in trying to solve this, we could come back and mess with it. It sounds interesting, but there's probably a way to get it to work. But let's just move on to one more thing that I want to show about multiple models. So I'm going to come back and I'm actually going to open up a model that I already produced instead of going through all the clicks and changes to do this. And I'll talk about a couple recommendations from this. But in this in my Power BI service, what I set up was the sample models in a workspace that I just called example data, right? And this is what we've been using. If we look at these data sets, we've been using the customer profitability, and then there's an HR sample. And they come out and they put these reports into this. This is just one, something that you could add under this new part if you haven't done it before. So this model here, what I did is I brought in both models, and then I renamed each one of the tables within the model to put a prefix on it so that I could easily tell which model that they came from. And you could see that when you come into this, your relational view, it will show different color coding to tell you which model things are coming from. But what'll also happen is when you add one model, then you add a second model, if there are collisions, like in this case, business units collides with business units in the second one, and then it will produce model number 2 because of that. So actually, let's go ahead and do that exercise just so it's easily seen. I'm going to say new. Get rid of this so that we don't see it. And again, we start out with a Power BI data set. We're going to say customer profitability. I'm going to say create. And it produces that live connection first. We'll say make changes to this, where it adds our local model. Okay, so we have just one model, DirectQuery. We could see all that here. So let's go ahead and add the second one and see what happens. And it's going to be the human resources sample. And we're going to tell it to go ahead and just add everything. And remember, business units and business units exist here. So now when we do this, it's going to give us a warning first off that we got a potential security risk. And you notice we got business units 2. And, we have everything else kind of intermixed. And unfortunately, it's really hard to tell what's what. So that's why in producing the model the way that I recommend it, I came in and renamed all the ones that were customer to have CUST in front of it first, and then brought in the HR one and then renamed all those to have HR in front of them. What you'll notice is I didn't connect anything between these two models. There's basically 2 different islands just sitting in the same DirectQuery data set. So I'm not going to be able to query across them, but what I can do, like I did in this case, is I have a set of charts, some visual page that is showing data from customer. And then in the same report, I could just go to the next page and I have a new hire count all within the same one. So I don't have to try to navigate up on, if I publish this to the service, right? If I just did it with each data set, the user would have to navigate to get customer data from one report to another. Here, I'm able to do it all within the one report and just have them switch pages to view what they want to view.
So an extension of this, Kevin, let me ask the question if you've done it, or maybe Donald has done it. You could have a disconnected table that you use, say, executive, who both had staff and customers, right? So as a sales executive that had staff that reported to him, but also had customers that he was responsible for. Couldn't you use a disconnected table, use that in a slicer, and then have a measure on each side of your model that used that in a switch statement to do, some kind of only show the results for this executive, as long as the executive was on both models.
I think you could, right? And then you're doing a connection where you're not putting the relationships in there,
Yes.
right? But you're building a measure to find it that way,
Through a
right?
disconnected table, yeah, that disconnected table trick and a some kind of a switch statement that would allow you to switch or filter, right?
Yeah.
Either or.
Yeah, I think you could do that. I was trying to avoid, because I do again think at that point, if you're doing it in the method that you're talking about, you're kind of controlling how much data is being moved between one model and the next.
Exactly. You're only moving your filter that you set up in your slicer.
Right. And you still might be able to do that by putting the related, by having your own table here, and then connecting with the weak relationships, your
Yeah.
executive to the executive. I don't think executive fits in this one, right? But if we said business units, right? And we just put a table that was just a business unit name, and then we related it to this one, and we related it to this one, then you would be able to just use that one, the common table, and build that out. That's a little more advanced than what I was trying to get into in this setup, right? Because once you start connecting the models and everything, you got to start thinking about where everything is going to run. Again, SQL BI, I think about a week or two ago, put out a great video where they talk about wholesale and retail is what they're calling it. The way where everything runs. And if everything is up on the one model, it's sending it over to that model. It's called wholesale. And if it's, go ahead.
That's why I was talking about doing it with a disconnected table, because then you could control where it goes through your DAX instead of letting it handle it through the relationships, and could be going wonky.
Yeah. And I think you would end up using things like treat as with that, or other filters within that DAX statement. Actually, I have an exercise that I'm doing where I just started messing with that a little bit. And the one thing that I ran into was because actually I was trying to union a table that was in the remote model with a table I had in the local model, and I got an error, and I was digging into that. So I think some DAX functions are going to work, some are not. And I think there's still more learning on what's going to be able to happen there. Have you gotten it to work like that, Dan?
Yeah, but I control very closely who has build permissions on that composite model, so they can't go up and do something funny.
Right. Yep. Okay, so go ahead. Sorry.
This is Amin. This is kind of rudimentary, but it helps me understand the big picture of like what you're demonstrating. So this file doesn't show that table tab, right? It has the visualization tab and the model tab, and is that because in the example with the what if parameter, you created local data, local in this file, and here there's no data local in this file. This is just connected out to these other. Is that correct?
That is exactly correct. That's a great observation. That's something I should be able to pull out in the future and give in this presentation. Yep. So,
and I have kind of a related question, because I don't, if I understand right, this doesn't care if the data sets that you're connecting to, they themselves could be either import or DirectQuery. And this thing it just doesn't care. It's a data set. I mean, it's like, it doesn't matter how it got its data. Is that correct?
That is exactly correct. So just like before, when we talked about doing DirectQuery against SQL, and you produce your DirectQuery data set, this just happens to totally pull in all that metadata, but the same results happening when I produce these visuals. When I produce this visual, there's a DAX query that's going to be generated. And if we run Performance Analyzer and start recording on it and refresh our visuals, we could copy this query. I'm going to go ahead and start up DAX Studio. And this may be another good thing to kind of show to get that point across. You notice when I go to paste that in, it says you have multiple query types within the query that we just grabbed from Performance Analyzer. So we could see the DAX only, or both the DAX and the direct query. So I'm going to tell it to do both. And if we start up at the top, we see our filter tables that are produced. And then our summarized columns, which is what's typically produced. That's why it calls it core. And then they window it by doing top N, and then the evaluate. So this right here, this is the DAX that was generated to produce that visual. And then it has to send this off as a query, as a direct query to the data source. Now, it just so happens this looks exactly the same as what was up here, because this is from using SQL BI's comments. This is a wholesale query. Everything could be done up on the remote model. And so it's sending pretty much the exact same thing back up to the remote model. If this was a SQL Server database, this direct query would actually show SQL Server code, SQL code.
Gotcha.
But that's an excellent point.
But I'm not sure if you want that performance of direct querying to a data set that is then direct querying to the raw source. You're making a few hops that are probably not going to be the fastest way to do something.
Yeah, that could be a little bit risky. And again, I think we're going to learn a lot more during this next year, but I think this is a good way for people to get their feet wet, right? Is coming up with ways to utilize these models in a lower risk fashion and learn more from it. Okay, so I got a whole bunch of links that I've been looking at. And I think I added one or two to this list. So I'm going to put a shareable link, and all these ones that I keep adding on. This is a new platform for me, by the way, this raindrop.io. I've been using it since Christmas as a link management. So hopefully you guys could get to that. And then these links, right? So I got the Microsoft documentation on this. SQL BI's article, when they were super excited about how this is a huge milestone. That's a good one to kind of to read and see their initial reactions to it. They have a lot of hope with it. But then as we're starting to see now late of 2021 and into 2022, people are kind of questioning it a little bit. This next one is Paul Turley's article that he titles it, "Are We There Yet?" with composite models using the direct query over Power BI data sets. That's a really good article to kind of read, where he gets into all the different chaining. Again, the advanced mechanics of it, but don't let the advanced part intimidate you from using it to get, what I showed here. SQL BI's latest one, where they talk about wholesale and retail execution. And then in the Raindrop link, I also have the one they put out today. And I have a video from Feb of last year from Chris Wagner, where he was introducing his view on composite models and how he sees it going with this tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. It's going to be interesting if he circles back and looks at that and says, are we really able to do that right now? Because I think there are some limitations and some concerns on doing it that much. But what he talks about at tier 3 is kind of what I've introduced here, right? Smaller use cases of if you have some, type of code that you could build in that you don't have to pollute your pristine model with, by all means, utilize the direct query / composite model mode for this. That's it. Thanks for all the questions during it. Is there any other questions, any conversation that we still want to cover?
Bravo, Kevin.
No, that
Yeah,
was
this is
really
great.
good.
I think it's I missed last week, Kevin, because we got sick and moved to Christmas on the 30th, but I think it's super useful to get this message out there because I think there's people who have, and we were a group that was this way. We kind of gave up on composite models because just too much performance issues. Well, not if you just do a handful of let's say light things. So this is a really good message. I like it.
Good.
Yeah, I like the tip on using it to reduce the number of tables, because especially if you're doing some training and stuff, that's an easy way to get a simplified view of something for them to look at. And I'm definitely going to steal the idea of changing the names to put the prefixes on them so you don't get all the name collisions, because I've certainly gotten that before.
Yeah. And you could see up on my screen, right? If you're using Tabular Editor, you could use this very simple code of just, select the tables that you want and type in what prefix you want. Now I happen to be I got two models for some Power BI metadata. I got activity in one model and I have the metadata in another. And what we're trying to figure out is all of our workspaces, we got like 3,500 workspaces out there.
Oh, wow.
Some have nothing at all in them because it was from when teams used to just produce them. But also we have ones that have things in it, and we have a list of employees that are no longer with the company I'm doing this for. And we're trying to find, are they tied to any of these workspaces, right? And I got closer with that. And the last thing I want to do is take any of those workspaces that still remain and say, which ones had zero activity throughout the year, last year, and those are candidates to go away as well. And so I got both within one composite model. And I think I'm going to be able to do this kind of using your technique, Dan, is writing more either queries or measures or something to do that. So I wrote this real quick to just kind of rename each one of my tables before I brought the second set of tables in. So
cool. Yeah, just
pretty
code.
easy.
Did you publish that script to Power BI.tips DAX?
No, I haven't. I need to make it a little bit nicer first before, Mike will accept anything like that. But I'll put it out on the chat here real quick.
His repo. No, put it in his repo. He's got a repo for Tabular Editor scripts.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think if I've submitted to that one. I know some of the other ones I've submitted to, and if I didn't have enough comments and other things with it, he comes back to me.
Or Mike finds enough time to filter those.
All right, I'm going to stop screen share. I think we could go ahead and stop the recording, Michelle.